Greetings, everyone. Ben Murray here. Excited to introduce Gary Hagmueller, President and Chief Executive Officer at Arcion Labs. Welcome to the show today, Gary.
Thanks, Ben. Really great to be here.
Hey, thanks for joining me. We'll get to your latest Series A round in a second, but would love to hear a little bit about your background in SaaS first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my background in SaaS actually goes back so far that SaaS wasn't even a thing when I got into it. The interesting thing, Ben, is that I came out of graduate school and I went into the telecommunications industry, which frankly, I don't know if you realize, but it was probably one of the earliest actual SaaS businesses. Because after SaaS came around, like all the ways in which we assessed, the value of subscribers and talked about health of business and other things like that were all things that we had used, in the telecom world. So, I like to think that I've been in SaaS, over 20 years at this point, even though SaaS probably hasn't been around all that long.
Yeah, really interesting. Because when I've talked to some telecom companies, what they talk about, maybe a little different acronyms, but some of the same concepts as SaaS.
Exactly.
So really interesting. And I noticed in your LinkedIn profile, you also had some stints as a CFO. So tell me about that and how that kind of influenced your CEO or CEO philosophy.
Yeah, no, look, I think, I've had a very fortunate set of backgrounds. So like the career arc has basically gone as follow. I'm actually really a sales and deal guy. I came out of business school, basically doing corporate development and business development stuff, which was all great. I had joined a startup company, which is, back in the 2001 timeframe, which is really where my love of these entrepreneurial things happened. But then, what happened in 2001, like, the music stopped and the market kind of crashed and the company, we weren't going to do the same business developy sort of things that they were originally thinking about doing. But they looked at me and they said, like, hey, you seem to be pretty good with a spreadsheet and we like you. So why don't you go and like kind of run all these other things over here, like, finance and accounting and HR and all that sort of stuff. And, we'll just figure out what you want to do later. And it's one of those things that, be careful what you're good at because you'll wind up doing more of it. But over time, what happened is, moved into an ever increasing amount of roles in the CFO sort of space. But always interestingly enough, Ben, with this kind of salesy or outward bound sort of spin. And I think that's a function of the whole, fact that I'm pretty good at communicating and telling a story and convincing people of the merit of what it is I'm saying. But I can also back it up with, some great economics and modeling against it. But really, I think to the essence of your question, the CFO background, in my opinion, there's really two things you need to be successful in a startup CEO sort of role. You need to understand in quick order how to analyze things and how to assess the economic viability of the things that you're thinking about. And the second most important piece, well, it probably is the most important piece, is the ability to sell your vision, your product, your message, whatever, to a variety of different audiences. So that CFO background was super useful in kind of the speed modeling and understanding perspective. And, I use it pretty much every day at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah. Usually talk to a lot of CFOs, but not as many, but you do see that transition, CFOs becoming CEOs, which is great to see. So, so tell us a little bit about Arcion Labs. What do you do? How long you've been there? When were they founded?
Yeah. So the company itself is about 4 years old. I've really only been with the company since the end of last year, so about the December sort of time frame. And the interesting thing, and I'll explain what it does through the journey that I took to get here. My background, as we kind of chatted about a bit before, has always been, recurring revenue related. Last 10 years of it was all basically in machine learning and AI. So we were selling really large applications, AI sorts of applications to banks, insurance companies, government agencies, that sort of stuff. The interesting thing is we would sell these multi-seven-figure sort of deals to these companies. Every one of my buyers always wanted to have the data that powered their models refresh in real time, right? So think stuff coming out of Oracle or SAP or whatever these enterprise data stores, they wanted it in real time. Absolutely none of them could get anywhere close to that, because usually what would happen is the IT groups would have to build scripts that would then go query these databases. And of course, you would only want to do that at off hours, irregularly, right? And so most of them every 2 weeks to a month would have these, very, high order sorts of AI models refreshed with new information. And that frustrated them. because what it did is it caused them to miss the trends that would happen, like, within the hour or within the day, right? That could have been really instructive in terms of either generating more revenue or blocking fraudsters from doing stuff, or any list of things that we did. So flash forward to what Archeon does, right? So when I got to know what Archeon does, I spent a bunch of time last year talking to Raj, who's the founder over here. I jokingly tell people I kind of got angry that I didn't know about it 10 years ago, because it solved the problem I just described in spades. And so that's what Archeon does. What Archeon does is a form, we call it data mobility, but really what it is it takes the transactions that get written into a production database, and it basically figures out how to do that without impacting the production system. So think slowing it down or creating a security hole or other things like that. And in real time, moving it to any place where you want to use that data for either an analysis or machine learning or other stuff like that. It does it using a very specialized sort of technology called change data capture. Think of it as kind of the Bentley of data streaming sorts of techniques, and that's basically what we do. So
okay,
enough of a sense.
Yeah, I think I understand that enough in my terms, layman terms, to understand that. Yeah, so that does make sense with data mobility, of taking those transactions, that database, moving it quickly to other sources so you can analyze it. So really interesting. And founded about 4 years ago, so around 2018.
Yep.
And then what's your geographic distribution? Do you have a headquarters? Are you guys all remote?
Yeah. So basically we're kind of location agnostic at the end of the day, although what happens in reality is that you get modes of people. So our headquarters are here in San Mateo, California, right? So in the Bay Area. And there's probably about 5 or 6 people who are coming into the office on a regular basis. We do have an office. That is where I'm talking to you from today. But we're agnostic, right? So there are people who live in the East Bay who never come into the office. We have a few people who live in Austin. We have a few people who live in Zagreb in Croatia. And we have a few people who live in India, principally in Pune, but in other places as well. So we're nicely distributed. The reason why we have this structure, I think, is a number, right? So we have sales and marketing sorts of stuff, which exist here in the Bay Area, and it's important to have everybody in the same room, kind of thinking through stuff and talking about stuff. But then we're picking up on areas where there are principal skills. Like Pune is important because there's a lot of database companies that were out there, right? And what we do is ultimately we're essentially building a database without necessarily worrying too much about the repository aspect of it. And Zagreb is one of those things where we've got some great talent that has formed out there. And as we've needed more talent over time, great talent tends to attract great talent. So we've gotten a great assortment of people in that geo. And the good news is it's working for us in this distribution.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's great. So San Mateo headquarters plus employees globally. Yeah. And then your overall team size plus contractors, what is that roughly?
Yeah, it's plus or minus 50 at this point here. Okay. And I say plus or minus is because in any given month we may be adding folks or not and bringing contractors. Most of the employee base is employees, though. We really don't have contractors.
Okay, most employee. Okay, and then I know it sounds like you don't want to disclose revenue, but about 50 team size, and then any big lofty revenue goals targets that you guys are trying to hit?
So we don't go into the exact revenue numbers as you noted, but like we're in the 7 figures already from an ARR perspective. That's where we began the year. We should triple plus depending on market conditions this year. This is the good news is this is a really important thing that almost every large company needs to tackle. And with the cloud data warehouses like Databricks and Snowflake, really starting to see an acceleration of traction, right? That's the prime use case for us. People taking things out of, let's say, Oracle and trying to consume it in a machine learning model on Databricks. Well, there's just no real good way to do it in real time unless you employ us, right?
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So yeah, 7 figures ARR, but sounds like growth is really good now, about triple. So, right, a lot of things going on in the market right now. You see a lot of investor memos saying, hey, extend cash runways, hold on to cash, be conservative. But it sounds like you guys are still full steam ahead.
Well, so we got that same memo, right?
Yeah.
So, we have been prudent. So going back to the CFO background sort of thing, we started taking prudent measures, I would say, much earlier than a lot of other folks. So one of the things that I tend to do a lot of reading, right, on especially like economic sort of reading, and yeah, I'm kind of a bit of an economics geek sort of guy. So I was starting to see in like the December, January timeframe that weird stuff was on the horizon, and like, maybe we shouldn't go run full steam. So what I would characterize is we've done a harder job of prioritizing what we're going to do, and most importantly, what we're not going to do. And when you do that, some very curious things kind of pop out, right? You wind up focusing on the things that you do best more than the things that you might eventually want to do more of. And when you have a very large market like the one that we're addressing, it turns out being better at the core things you do actually probably winds up accelerating your sort of revenue, right? Because you can just tell a better story. You can have a more, feature complete product. The list of benefits goes on and on. So for us, basically the economic malaise is translated into prudent hiring, more prudent prioritization, and then, a finer honing of the ideal customer profile, which has allowed us to kind of continue growing in the way that we thought. So we're still on plan. We're not seeing any real slippage in our deals. I'm hypersensitive to listening for when sales cycles get stretched out, because that's your indicator that the market's getting, concerned about the thing you're doing. We have a cost play that once you go through the sales cycle, people realize, oh, wait, the way you're doing it is actually cheaper than the alternatives I have. That's a good thing in our favor. So there's a lot of good tailwinds that are keeping us on track.
Yeah, really interesting. So I'm guessing with your product, are you targeting mid-market enterprise type companies, global companies, or do you have ACVs, from low to high?
Yeah, so look, I jokingly tell people like dry cleaners don't run Oracle, right? So generally our customer set tends to skew larger. And when you have the larger customer sets, usually what you're plugged into are kind of longer term projects that, yeah, okay, so earnings might not be great this quarter or whatever else, but we still need to do this thing over here, right? Because our future revenues are associated with it. And we usually wind up getting lumped into those sorts of things. We do see ourselves sometimes getting into like what I'd say mid-market sort of players. But these are what I would describe as sophisticated mid-market players, and they're usually in business for more than 10 years, which means they'll have some of the older systems still running. And in those cases, there's a big cost play there, right? Because the old ways that they're doing this is costing them a lot of money. It's not working particularly well. They're not able to realize these new business opportunities that, the CEOs are usually, very adamant that they pursue, right? So it works out pretty well. But our ASPs do generally skew on the higher end, right? So
okay, and then larger enterprise, larger customers, larger probably ACVs. So like, is this say right now handful of customers, 100 customers, or?
Oh no, it's sub 100 customers at this
sub 100. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Keep in mind, so like Raj and crew did an absolutely great job taking the thing to market in the last year, but the company only had engineering sort of talent up until the December timeframe. So what we're doing here is we're basically creating the go-to-market model essentially from scratch, and that is not to limit or otherwise say anything about the company's success prior to that. In fact, it's really more of a testimony to the product market fit aspect of it, is that without a professional sales organization, still managed to grow a pretty meaningful company from a revenue perspective, right? Yeah. But yeah, so we're in the process right now of building up the go-to-market organization, and maybe not this year, but certainly by next year we should be in the hundreds.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Great to hear. So let's talk capital. So you had a recent raise in the, I think you said December, January timeframe, Series A for, you said 13 million. And tell us a little bit now, how much capital have you raised to date? Is it the 13, or did you have a seed round before?
Oh no, there was a seed round. Yeah. So like today, what is A used to be, the new A, or whatever the phraseology is. So the company's got about 18 million total in it. Okay. And the way, so Raj and crew were pretty prudent about raising in the past. They kind of only raised when they needed to. It's infrastructure, right? And I don't know how familiar you are with infrastructure, but these are not easy companies to build. The engineering involved is pretty extreme, right? And if you think about the customer set that I just described earlier, well, you can't go in there with crappy software that breaks every 5 minutes, right? So you have to harden the product before you're going to get any meaningful customer traction. So the seed round was really done to build out an awesome product. And now the great news is we've got that in place, and the new round is basically geared at firing up the go-to-market model so that we can become a highly mechanized sort of organization.
Okay, interesting. And so 13 million raised, Series A, and I think you said lead investor, maybe only investor for that Series A was Bessemer.
Well, Bessemer was the lead investor.
Lead investor.
We had a nice little pro rata fight. So that tells you a little bit. The existing investors liked it. And we also had participation from Databricks. So Databricks is one of our more important partners. We're a big enabler of their business, right? Because we move large amounts of workload out of, well, not out of, but we source the data from these enterprise systems and move them into Databricks. And for Databricks, that's a great thing because their revenues increase as people begin to do more work in Databricks. And the best way to do more work is to put more data in there, right?
Yep. Yeah, makes sense. And then, I work with a lot of founders and, fundraising always coming up. So I'm just curious in your experience, or at least for the Series A, what were those triggers or milestones that you were looking at to say, hey, it's time, maybe other than cash running out, but
right.
It was,
well, there's that certainly.
Yeah, those signals, because it is, it's a bit art and science here, with that raise and when to do it, how much. So tell us a little bit about that, like those, what were those signals, those triggers that said, hey, we're reaching this point and we want to raise, and it sounds like then you're going to put some of this money to your go-to-market engine. So just curious about how you viewed that and when you knew it was ready to you were ready to raise.
Yeah, certainly. Okay. Well, so here's an interesting little background. So like I spent a chunk of last year as an entrepreneur in residence at Red Point Ventures. So I got to kind of see what was coming through the pipe in terms of the different companies that were out there. Not necessarily that we're competitive with what Archeon does, but just generally, right? And so, part of that experience was also getting to know, Raj and the company and all that sort of stuff. And the epiphany really was this, right? So the way in which they were looking at it was one where, look, the trade-off question was, do we take less money and continue to harden the product, or do we think that we're at a state right now where there's enough product market fit that we can accelerate by adding on a go-to-market sort of opportunity? As I looked around, the company, I mean, there's no clearer way to demonstrate product market fit than, a lot of people are buying your product already. And so the fact that we had revenues that were already north of where a lot of similar firms were raising Series A's were probably the right indicator for me that like we were at a state where that made sense. Firstly. Secondly, although the early customers I would describe looked more like a scatter plot, there's a bunch of different modes of things, and this customer's doing this thing over here, and these customers are doing that, right? But there was enough of a pattern that was emerging that you could tell, okay, well, we could probably tighten this into a regression line pretty quickly by focusing on these certain sorts of use cases. And oh, by the way, the customers who are in that more conforming sort of use case were the most referenceable, the happiest, and all of that stuff, right? Which is really super important because as you're going out and raising, your new investor is going to want to talk to existing customers to figure out, hey, is this real? Is this good? Do you like it? Would you buy more? And stuff like that. So having customers who fit the ideal customer profile that you're trying to drive at, who are happy, and who would be good references, not just for the financing, but also for future customers that we would recruit, for me felt like, okay, we're ready. And so that's really why we did the round size that we did and the timing we did. And I think the thesis that we had when we approached the financing is largely being borne out. As I said, we're on plan, and things are going pretty good right now. So.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so product market fit, a big piece of that puzzle. If you have that, now let's go after some more customers. And so the 13 million investing that primarily, where are you sprinkling that magic dust? In go-to-market engine mostly, maybe some engineering.
Yeah, well, exactly. So we brought on, well, a couple things, right? So we had no marketing person. We hired a head of marketing, right? We had no marketing operation. We put money into marketing, so events and content and lots of other stuff. And if you go to our website today, and if you look at the Wayback Machine from, let's say, this time last year, you'll see a very marked difference in terms of the company's profile. So we sprinkled some that way. This is very much a land and expand sort of sale. right? So there isn't a single customer that we've had that hasn't come back and said, hey, I would like more, right? They've all expanded, and they generally expand relatively quick. So for me, that told me, a customer success operation was super important as well, right? Because I think you could, my general view is, and it is playing out right now, is that you could probably drive revenue growth almost as much from your existing customers as you could by adding net new, right? So customer success was important. And then if you're going to go off and expand your go-to-market operation, kind of got to get sales folks going. So we brought some sales into the organization as well, and that includes solution architect sort of folks. Probably the biggest chunk of investment we've done. But to your point also, yeah, we did add some engineers, right? So we brought on a head of engineering, which is important because Raj is a great technical founder and a good product visionary sort of folks, but he firstly raised his hand and said, like, I'd like somebody else to go figure out the process pieces of it. So, we brought on a great head of engineering, and she's done a great job of bringing together talent and process. And so now we have, a great organization, and, we're cranking away on that. And, like I said earlier, we're not hiring aggressively right now. We'll hire as we continue to see certain success. My general formula is I like to invest into success. I don't like to hire 10 people and figure out if 5 of them will make it. So once we have the established pattern, and I jokingly say, the point at which the salesperson can't go to sleep because there's too many things to do, right? That's when we start to add on capacity and kind of ramp up the organization. And that's, we're kind of in the middle of that process.
Okay. Yep. I like that. So when the salesperson can't go to sleep, there's just too much to do. Maybe it's time to ramp up the sales team. So Series A, 13 million, Bessemer, big brand name in the vesting space. They push out, and I love their content as well. But what are some of those lessons learned? Any lessons that you've learned along the way here or from that raise that we can pass on to other founders and CEOs?
I mean, so like I've done a bunch of raises over the years, and I basically, the main lessons is, well, there's a couple things you have to put together. So number one, you need a tight story. Storytelling for the right raise is critically important. You can have a pretty interesting business and mealy mouth your way through a raise, and you may or may not get the money, right? Whereas there's plenty of people who have had so-so sort of businesses, but really could paint the picture in terms of strategic value of what they're putting together and what the thing could be, and wind up with amazing sorts of raises, right? So first and foremost, you have to tell the story in a way that's compelling. Secondly, and this goes back to what I talked about earlier, you have to make sure that you've got referenceable customers, and you really need to have sales pipe that will have people in it that are bullish enough to answer an investor's call. There is no stronger reference point for an investor than to talk to a prospective customer who says, hey, they did a great job. This is the pain I'm trying to solve. And if they can solve that, then this is a big win for me in my career and other stuff like that. That gives investors lots of confidence. I think the next piece is you got to have to understand the numbers and the model, right? You need to give people an understanding, an easy understanding of how it grows, what are the factors that contribute to its growth. And the point here is it's more important to talk a little bit more about kind of the unit economics sorts of things than it is necessarily coming up with the most perfect 3-year model, because everybody knows, a 3-year model is a pure work of fiction at this stage, right? It basically paints a picture of what it could be, right? But there are so many unknowns and uncertainties that you just don't know. But what you do know is, like, what does it cost me? How long does it take? And how much do I get at the end of it? And if you can explain that one pretty clearly, then people can get comfortable with the fact that there's some range of outcome here that looks pretty well. And then, I guess, the next thing is just to run a short, tight process, right? And, don't stretch it out. Try to get it done as quickly as possible, because that creates kind of auction value or auction buzz around the company. And those are kind of the high level bits. I mean, I could probably draw
that's great.
hours about stuff that I do, but those are the high level bits.
No, I love that. So tight story, referenceable customers. And just to make sure I understand this, also you said a sales pipeline where the potential investor can talk to a prospect that is maybe farther along in the pipe.
Yeah, that's right. I've done that on a few different raises, and that makes all the difference, because now what you're talking to is somebody who is not necessarily interested because they got a discount or, whatever in order to sign it, right? This is somebody who genuinely has pain, right, and is willing to talk to the investor to say, here's my pain and here's how I think they're going to solve it. They've convinced me that they can do that, and whatever. So usually when you're selling to larger companies, though, what happens is you have the person who wants to buy it is ready to buy it, but the procurement and the lawyers and other stuff like that usually stretch out the process for sometimes weeks, if even longer, right? And so if you can catch them in the window where they said, yes, I want to do this, and before the thing closes, then you've got a great opportunity for a solid reference.
Oh, that's a great tip. Catch them in right in that where they're happy, they say yes, perfect timing, drop in a potential investor. I love that. And also, even though say early stage Series A, it sounds like you still need to understand at this point enough data in your business to understand or at least talk through some of those major unit economics with potential investors, especially as say a sophisticated investor like Bessemer, where they're producing metrics benchmarks, talking about those all the time.
Right. Yeah, certainly. Look, again, you don't need the perfect story because things evolve, right? You'll discover new partners and new customers and new channels and whatever, right? But at least you need to understand kind of how we're in the big item blocks are, obviously, the average selling price that you're going to get. What do you get for that selling price? Investors are critically interested in like how much of the revenue is recurring versus services related, because as that's a big tip off for like, there's a lot of people that have like, oh, it's nice revenue, but like half of it is services related, which means it's super hard to put in, right? It doesn't work right. And you have to babysit and all that stuff, right? So the distribution of your revenue is going to be very important. Sales cycle is another thing that's super important because it tells you how easy or hard it is to get the thing up and running and how much customization is involved. And so short sales cycles, obviously everybody likes because the risk is lower. Right, and it indicates that it's more of a product necessarily than a servicey sort of thing, right? And so it's all of those sorts of metrics at this stage that are going to be, useful. When you get a critical mass of numbers, probably Series B or Series C, then the core model itself and conversion rates and other stuff like that become more important. But you just don't know them generally at this stage in an enterprise sort of operation. Yeah,
makes sense. No, that's great. Some great tips and experience there. So. What is next for Archeon Labs here? It sounds like you've got nice traction, maybe tripling growth this year. I'm sure hiring in different areas. So yeah, what's next? What are those big objectives for the company coming up?
Well, you kind of nailed the near term objective, right? So look, I think the interesting thing is what we're going to do is we're going to get super good at covering what I describe as kind of all the hard enterprise systems themselves. So, today we're already great when it comes to Oracle and IBM, SAP, that sort of stuff, and a litany of others, right? But what we're going to do is basically become the system of choice for all of the hard systems, the Teradatas of the world. We even have multiple customers now asking for mainframe sort of access. So this is like IBM DB2 stuff, which out in the next couple of months. So at the end of the day, the real thing that I want to build is I want to basically build a category leader that allows the data shops to basically consume data almost as a service, right? They shouldn't have to care where the source data is as long as they have the right permission to access it. Right? They shouldn't have to care where it is. They should just be able to grab what they need and build whatever cool analysis or machine learning model or what have you on whatever platform is best suited for the thing they're trying to build, right? And if we can do that, look, I think there's a very interesting opportunity here to kind of own a part of the data fabric that, heretofore people thought was always some kind of little pipeline or connector business. We view it as being much more. And so that's the forward vision, which is to go and complete that category construction sort of operation.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So thanks for joining us today. And then so I appreciate your time today. So if people want to find out more about you and your company, where can they find you online?
Definitely go to Archeon, ARCION.io. The website is full of lots of interesting thought leadership pieces in terms of what we do. I do tell people this is probably one of the biggest problems hiding in plain sight. Most people don't realize why they can't have the analysis or the models or other things that they want. is actually gated by the things that the technologies that they're relying on restrict them from. So we solved that, lots of thought leadership to get there. You can look me up on LinkedIn. That's also a good thing too. I try to post as much as possible, although there's never enough time to post enough. But over time that'll get more. And we periodically put a lot of things out, webinars or other things like that. So there's always an opportunity to expand learning and thinking around that as well.
All right, well, sounds great. So if you want to find out more, check out archeon.io. So ARCION.io, and check out Gary's profile on LinkedIn. So again, thanks for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thanks, Gary.
Okay.